Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the first webinar in the series, Interculturalism, Literature and the Arts in Ireland, hosted by the Department of English at Maynooth University. In this series, we will be hearing from some of the most inspiring people who have led organizations promoting interculturalism in its various forms in the context of literary and artistic production in Ireland. I would like to thank our head of department, Professor Lauren Arrington, for generously supporting this series of webinars. A big thank you to my colleague Tracy O'Flaherty for promoting the series, brilliantly managing all digital aspects and offering an insightful writer's perspective. A few reminders at the start. This webinar will be recorded. And to send your comments and questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. Our guest this afternoon is Mary Moynihan, multi-award winning and prolific writer, director, theatre, filmmaker, and interdisciplinary artist. Mary is artistic director of Smashing Times International Centre for the Arts and Equality and artistic curator for the annual Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival that runs this year from 16th to the 25th October. As artistic director of Smashing Times, Mary has been awarded many prizes, most recently in April 2021. Acting for the Future, Creative Arts for Health and Wellbeing Hub, which is a project designed and led by Mary, won the prestigious Arts Against COVID Award from the Arts and Health International Foundation. Mary specializes in transformative arts practice, using interdisciplinary, socially engaged arts practice to promote human rights, gender equality, diversity, and peace, developing cutting-edge arts-based projects with a range of organizations in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and across Europe. Mary is the creator of the award-winning Acting for the Future project, which has won a string of prizes and uses theatre and film to promote positive mental health and well-being. Mary is also lead artist on a range of projects using theatre, film, and new digital technologies to promote a remembrance of European history with a focus on the Holocaust and World War II, and also the promotion of human rights, gender equality, and peace today. She has written and directed many theatrical pieces, staged nationwide, and has been involved in the film industry both as filmmaker and actor. Her current filmic project is inspired by stories of artists and activists who stood up against fascism during the Spanish Civil War and World War II. And she's also working on a series of 6 short films on themes of human rights, equality, and diversity. Through various initiatives, including the Memory Project, Mary has worked extensively in Northern Ireland using the arts to promote peace building, reconciliation, and positive community relations. She's artistic curator for the annual Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival implemented by Smashing Times and Frontline Defenders. And the aim of the festival is to showcase and highlight the extraordinary work of human rights defenders in Ireland and around the world, past and present, and the role of the arts and artists in promoting human rights and equality for all. In her talk, Mary will be taking us on a journey through the fascinating history of Smashing Times, especially her brilliant contributions to its major initiatives. After the presentation that I know will include photographs and videos, we will have a conversation that will also feature our special guest, Sandrine Ndahriro, whom I'm very much looking forward to introduce later. Please send your comments and questions at any point in the chat function. Mary will be responding to these questions, and Sandrine also will be answering your questions in the last section of the webinar. Mary, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rita, and I'm delighted to be here. It's an absolute honour to be asked to speak today, and I'd like to thank Rita and Tracy and Sandrine and Maynooth University for this wonderful opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to be able to talk about Smashing Times International Centre for the Arts and Equality and the work that we're doing. I'm going to share my screen now because I am going to just show a few images as I'm talking through the work of Smashing Times. So just give me a moment and we'll set up our images. And at some point, I'm also going to share 2 videos with you on the work that the company are doing to enable you to see a little of the type of work of what we're involved in at the moment. So, Smashing Time's International Centre for the Arts and Equality is an award-winning international organisation, and we are dedicated to promoting the arts for human rights, equality and diversity. A key part of the work is creating partnerships with a wide range of organisations and finding ways to connect citizens to the arts, human rights, climate justice, gender equality, diversity, peace, and positive mental health and well-being. So there are a number of the different areas that we work in. We work with artists and communities of place and interest, and the idea is to create collaborative arts practice, working in local, national, European, and international settings. Core services of the organisation include a European Arts and Human Rights Network, which is open for everybody to join, free. We also provide a resource and advice service about promoting the role of the arts for human rights and equality and diversity. And we also run an artist professional development programme, which is particularly important in terms of supporting artists to use their arts practice to engage in equality and rights. And on top of those core services, the company then provides a programme of arts activities conducted on an annual basis. And that programme of arts activities is interdisciplinary, involves a wide range of arts practices and can involve different programmes presented each year depending on the partners we're working with. And then on top of that, we also run the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival since 2019. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the festival later. Our vision with all of the work is creating a world where all people have access to the arts and where the arts are open for all to participate in, to make and to enjoy. And it's about using the arts to create a fair and inclusive society where equality, human rights and diversity are fully recognised, valued and protected. And I want to talk just a little about the influences on the company. So this image here is of Viola Spolin. She's an American theatre practitioner, and she's one of the practitioners whose work inspires us. And we have a number of different inspirations. So for example, in the very beginning, the company was set up by myself and a number of artists who met at the Focus Theatre in Dublin. And as part of our work with the Focus Theatre, we were working with the wonderful Deirdre O'Connell. And Deirdre O'Connell she was Irish American, so her family were Irish, emigrated to America. Deirdre grew up and wanted to become involved in the arts, and she trained with Lee Strasberg in the Actors Studio in New York. And Deirdre's fellow actors would have been Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe. She was roommates with Barbara Streisand. And Deirdre had a desire to come back to Ireland. She was destined for a great career. She wanted to come back to Ireland to introduce the Stanislavski system of actor training to Irish artists. And she came back and set up the Focus Theatre, where I was lucky enough to be trained. And there is a lineage because people who had trained Deirdre had trained people who had originally worked with Konstantin Stanislavski, and he was a Russian theatre practitioner and who is considered the founding father of actor training. But we're particularly interested in Stanislavski because he talked a lot about using the body in performance, but also about a sense of truth. And this idea of using the body in performance and a sense of truth is something that Viola Spolin also works with. And we think it's important to draw on practitioners from the past, but you're taking their work and integrating it into the work you're doing with communities, passing on those skills, but at the same time, interpreting the work for yourself. And there is a wonderful quote by Viola Spolin where she talks about the idea of, she says, the physical is the known, and through it we may find our way to the unknown, the intuitive, and perhaps beyond to the human spirit itself. And she also says, the work breaks through the walls that keep us from the unknown, ourselves and each other. And I like this idea of a sense of truth in the work, but also the idea of the unknown. And how do we make the unknown or the invisible visible? How do we bring the unknown into the space? And in a way, that's at the core of the work. It's about shining a light or illuminating dark spaces or stories that haven't been told in order to bring them to a wider community. So in terms of Smashing Times, a key part of the work is reaching out and engaging with different partnerships and working with diverse communities. We work cross-community and cross-border. So for example, we have worked in Northern Ireland for many years using the arts for peace building and community relations work. And I might just go back and say a little bit about that, just to give the history of the company. So we were set up in 1991, which is actually 30 years this year. And in 1991, this was before we were working on the ground before the ceasefires in Northern Ireland. And we were very much on the ground using the arts with diverse communities, using the arts to promote, to bring different communities together. And based on the success of that work, we were invited to work across Europe with a range of different organizations. So arts organizations, but also with universities, with adult education groups, with groups working with refugees and asylum seekers. And we were being asked to share the techniques we had developed for peace, using the arts for peace building and reconciliation, but to adapt those techniques to work on themes that were impacting on our partners in Europe. For example, with the movement of people and the refugee crisis that was happening, and looking at the idea of anti-racism that was happening across Europe. So we were very much involved in bringing that work to work with different communities across Europe. And that work has continued to this day, where we believe that the idea of linking with local communities in Ireland is important, but trying to find ways to reach out and build links on an international basis. And the company originally was theatre and film, but in 2015 we branched out into a wide range of online digital arts practice. And I suppose we were lucky in that we were working in those techniques before the pandemic happened, and we continue then to work online with different communities. And I believe the arts are a wonderful medium in that sense, because they are very malleable and can be adapted in many different ways to continue to reach out and connect with diverse groups. In terms of the company, we believe that, as I was saying, partnership is important. And in 2019, which was 3 years ago, we approached Frontline Defenders. Now, Frontline Defenders are an organisation whose role is to promote and provide support for human rights defenders who are working in non-violent, peaceful ways around the world to protect and stand up for human rights. And Frontline were running a festival in Dublin called it was just called a Human Rights Festival. And we approached Frontline and said, we would love to get involved with you to run an art section of the Human Rights Festival. And through a series of meetings and getting to know one another, we all ended up partnering together on an equal basis and implementing what's now known as the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival. And we've a wide range of partners for that festival. So for example, Amnesty International, Fighting Words, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the National Women's Council of Ireland, Poetry Ireland, Irish Modern Dance Theatre, the Mill Theatre Dundrum, and we're working with a wide range of artists. And as Rita was saying, the idea of the festival is to celebrate the role of the arts for human rights, but equally to use the arts to raise awareness of what human rights mean to us in society, and to raise awareness of the work of human rights defenders, both in Ireland and around the world. And I just want to say a little in relation to the idea of human rights to do with the name of Smashing Times itself. So back at the turn of the century in Ireland, when women had no rights and were not able to vote and were excluded from many different institutions and were excluded from public life, there was a campaign that was set up by the suffragette movement. And as part of the suffragette struggle, so the suffragettes were fighting for the right to vote and for equality for women. And as part of their campaign, the suffragettes went around smashing the windows of public buildings to which they were excluded from. So they were smashing the windows of these buildings that had power structures that excluded women. And this became known as the Smashing Times period of the suffragette movement. And we really liked the sound of that idea of smashing windows. So we don't literally smash windows, but we like the idea of metaphorically aiming to break down barriers. So that's where the name Smashing Times came from. And we actually saw it in a book called the Smashing Times by the historian Rosemary Cullinan. And in relation to the idea of smashing barriers, the way we do that, one of the key techniques, I suppose, that we use is storytelling. And I think storytelling is very important for a number of reasons. So for me, stories are an attempt to share our values and our beliefs. And the social entrepreneur Simon Sinek says that storytelling is worthwhile when it shares what we stand for, not what we do. So I like that idea of sharing what we stand for, not what we do, and telling stories around what we stand for. And I think particularly all the art forms, including theatre and film, can be very effective, and they're effective tools for promoting equality and diversity. Because when you actively choose to go to a play or to watch a film, you are choosing to listen to someone else's story. And I think that idea of listening to someone else's story and making space in our lives to hear other stories is important. And also the idea of being able to tell our own story and to have our story acknowledged and validated. And of course, a problem with that is that who decides what stories get told and who decides how stories are told? And that's where the whole idea of creating space for diversity is something that the company is very cognizant of and always has been from the beginning, that we have to have a diversity of voices. And that means promoting intercultural dialogue. And the arts are an ideal medium for this, for promoting diversity and ensuring that diverse and collaborative stories are brought to the fore, brought to public consciousness and shared on a wider level. And it's not just telling diverse stories, it's really important that we find a way to ensure that diverse artists are supported to tell their stories. That is really important. And that we have diversity in the arts. And that means collaboration, and I think it means, yes, representation, but it means much more than that. In order to have proper intercultural diversity, there has to be power sharing. And I think in Smashing Times, we're trying to generate these conversations. For me, a very important conversation we need to start having is, who makes the arts? Who controls the arts? Who funds the arts? Who decides what arts are seen and heard? And how do we create genuine power sharing, not just representation, so representation for women, representation for diverse communities, but also ensuring that beyond representation, there is real power sharing. And this whole idea of power sharing is something we really need to be looking at. So in terms of human rights, I just want to say a little bit about human rights, because for me, human rights are about ensuring that all human beings are treated with equity, with equality, and with dignity and respect. So it's ensuring equity and ensuring dignity and respect. And, you know, for example, in Ireland, human rights might relate to the right to an affordable home. One of the UN Declaration, one of the articles in the UN Declaration of Human Rights is the right to afford to buy and own your own home. Human rights are to do with education, they're to do with freedom of expression, they're to do with the right to asylum. There are a whole range of human rights. And I think there's many parallels between the arts and human rights. So for example, both the arts and human rights are about exploring the world we live in, questioning the world we live in, so questioning identities, and looking at human relationships to do that, and exploring the idea of transformation. And particularly for me, the arts can be a way to create new visions or alternative visions for the future. And I always say about the arts and human rights, they're interdependent, because if the arts can only thrive in an environment that supports human rights. So in countries where human rights are abused, you will find there is direct attacks on human rights, and very often a corresponding suppression of artistic freedom and freedom of expression. And very often in countries, the arts are the first activity that is closed down, because this whole idea of if we can express ourselves freely within the arts. And there are numerous human rights abuses happening in relation to artists around the world at the moment. And I always recommend supporting a wonderful organisation called Free Muse, who each year are documenting statistically the abuses that are happening against artists around the world and the attacks on freedom of expression related to the arts. And they bring out an annual report each year to highlight what's happening in relation to the arts. And I do think the power of the arts is wonderful, but it can't be overestimated. Art may not change the world, but what it can do is it can elucidate the important questions, it can provide answers, or it can raise the questions rather than telling you what the answers are. And I think that's important. Arts cannot undo human rights abuses. That is very important. And I also think arts should not be compulsory in relation to human rights. But for me, as an artist, it's a choice. And the arts are very much about raising awareness, generating discussion, bearing witness, enabling us to remember and to promote inclusion, which is really, really important. So in my work, I'm involved with many different projects. So for example, this is one of the projects called State of the Art. The nation state is both violator and protector of human rights. And we are going to talk a little bit about this project later, but this is where we bring different artists together to find ways to look at how we can all share information with each other and how we're using the arts for human rights. In relation to my own work as an artist, I'm very much interested in historical memory, as Rita was saying, and I have created a number of films and a number of plays recently around telling stories of women, particularly from World War II, where women were standing up for the rights of others against totalitarianism and Nazi oppression, and also the idea of artists standing up against fascism. And I think these stories are very important. Women's stories are hidden or denied in history, so that's why I'm telling women's stories. But I'm also telling stories of women who chose, even when they lived in societies where they were oppressed, they chose to not accept that, and they chose to stand up. And a lot of the times they chose to stand up for the rights of others, which is really interesting. And I want to show you a short film now. And this short film it's a short scene from a film called Tell Them Our Names. And in Tell Them Our Names, we tell the stories of a number of artists. And the clip that I have available to show you is of a Spanish woman called Dolores Ibarruri. And she was known as La Pasionaria, and she was a revolutionary leader, a political activist, a communist, and a crusader against fascism. And she fought in the Spanish Civil War, and she is known for the famous cry, "They shall not pass." And what you have in the scene here is an imagined recreation of moments from the life of Dolores Ibarruri. So I'm now going to stop sharing with you, and I'm going to attempt to get this video working. So if you just bear with me for a few moments. Okay, so I will share screen again. Back to the beginning. So this is our film in time, or this one is called, the scene is called I Speak, and it's from the film called Tell Them Our Names, and it's a short scene based on an imagined recreation of moments from the life of Dolores Ibarruri.
A Russian astronomer named an asteroid after me, asteroid Dolores. It's still out there, spinning madly around in space like myself, a bundle of energy and movement.
I'm 8 years old. The miners are on strike. The soldiers confront them, pointing their guns.
And the women face the soldiers down. I look into the eyes of a soldier. He is scared. I listen to the women. Don't shoot us, they say. We have a right to strike. They speak passionately about the poverty they endure. And one by one, the soldiers withdraw. Something of that moment changes my life forever. I watch 4 of my children die because we are poor. I rarely speak of this, but inside I weep, my heart torn with grief. I survive, but I must do something. I read, attend meetings and rallies. I fight for change. I stand for election and win. Women can make a difference. I have 2 remaining children. I want to keep you with me, but how can I raise a child by dragging you through the streets, putting you in danger? So I send you away. I did it to make you happy, so you would enjoy a normal life. It crushed me to see you go, but I knew you would be safe. There is no sacrifice I would not make. I write for a communist newspaper. When they ask what name I am to use, I say La Passionaria. But that signifies a woman. Choose another name, they say, but I'll hold fast. I am strong, focused, relentless, ruthless. I walk the path to the end. That is the only way I know. That is my soul. I am La Passionaria. A woman denied the right to work is a slave. Earn your independence. Fight with your hearts and minds for justice. We are all free and equal. During the war, men and women fought bravely side by side. There is no distinction. I never feel unequal. I speak. My voice deep and booming. Words pour out of me. I am brave. My will like steel. I exalt in my strength. I am La Passionaria. I speak out. They shall not pass. I speak. I am not silent. I speak.
Okay, so that was from the film Tell Them Our Names. And I'm just going to mention two final things before we finish up. I'm going to share screen and just go back to the images because I want to show one more image. And this is an image, a new project that I'm working on is going to be making a short film around women poets, revolutionary women poets. And this is the poet Audre Lorde, who is, and has always been one of my inspirations. And there's a number of poets whose work I've always read and found has touched me in a unique way. And what I particularly like about this work is the idea of using poetry to express ourselves in terms of our personal emotional experiences. And Audre had this saying where she wrote about poetry, where she said was, it is to express hidden sources of power from where true knowledge comes from. Lasting action, where lasting action comes from. And what she said about poetry is that poetry is not a luxury. It forms a quality of the light within, which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards. First made into language, then into ideas, then into more tangible action. So I love this idea of going from language to ideas to action. And the idea that she said is poetry is the way we can give name to the nameless, so it can be thought. The furthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives. And I found recently working with many different artists around using the arts for human rights and cultural diversity, this idea of that when you're dealing with human rights, you're talking about issues that are out there in the wider community, but you're finding a way to make links between what is personal to each of us and bringing that personal into the political. So bringing our private space into the public space. And how do we do that? And I suppose part of my work is the idea of working with and sharing stories of women that have inspired me. So the different women I've talked about here, the other different artists I'm working with. And I particularly like this image here because women are powerful and dangerous. And I think it's important that we find ways to tell stories of many different people and find ways to ensure those stories are told by people who need to have or want to have their stories told. And I'm going to just finish with a short poem, because this idea of poetry and expressing the personal into the political, and that's something I've done in this short poem, which is called In Time. And I made this poem shortly after experiencing a serious form of COVID to do with the pandemic, and I was quite ill for a while. And as I was coming through that experience, I was able to go back online and work with a number of artists who you'll see in the video and I wrote this poem, and then it was brought to the artist, and together we created this short poem film. So it is my pleasure to finish up now by sharing this poem film with you, which is called In Time, and it is a poem, I suppose, expressing my and our hopes and visions for the future, using the arts to express that through poetry. So I'm now going to share the screen, and
In time. In time, we will recover.
In time, there will be a vaccine, and we will be able to go outside.
To work, to the park, to the mountains.
To meet family and friends. To travel to the ends of the earth if we wish.
In time, we will rebuild our world. We will create an equal society where people count. Our friends, family, co-workers, and those who provide services and look after each other. We will get our values right, our priorities straight, and create a world for what counts. People, the planet we live on, and respect and dignity for all.
In time, we will breathe calmly again. In time, we will meet each other in the darkness of a theater space and know again the magic of a connection that is invisible, yet truly felt.
In time, we will hug those we love and have missed. In time, we shall mourn those that have died. In time, we will bear witness.
In time, we will create and imagine. What if?
In time, we will reject governments that do not act on our behalf. We shall create respect for the planet we live on and know our atmosphere is clearing and our world can breathe calmly again. In time, we shall be true to our inner selves, listen to the voice of our inner souls, and follow our heart's desires.
In time, we shall serve ourselves and equally, at the same time, serve others. In time, we will fight the good fight. And at the same time, let go. In time, we will enjoy life and be present in the moment.
And one day, in time,
we will realize
there is no time.
so thank you. That was In Time, and the performers were Crazy Voice and Carla Ryan, and the music was performed and composed by Lisa McLaughlin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, for this beautiful ending of your presentation on your various initiatives and collaborations, and on the subject of these creative collaborations and how wide-ranging they are. And it's truly stunning, particularly through the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival, to have this wide-ranging collaborative initiative. And it's an incredible feat in itself, and just shows the importance of the work that can be done when this artistic imagination that you have been talking about is driven by, and also when it drives the pursuit of rights and dignity for all through intercultural engagement and active citizenship. What does this collaboration in this production of the festival as a collaborative initiative mean to you as the artistic director?
Well, I think for me, collaboration is key to how we work. And it really ensures that if you collaborate, you can have a wide range of different perspectives and have different stories told. And I think it creates a space for us to look beyond our own lives and creates a space for us to ensure that different perspectives are part of the picture. And the way we work it in the festival is we've partnered with different organisations, and each organisation creates their own events and brings those events to the festival. But also as well, the partners come together and work together to try and find a shared way to create shared events. And collaboration and partnership, I think, are something that we all talk about, but yet to do it sometimes can require quite a lot of work because, you know, collaboration can be full of different, it can work really well, and then it can be full of differences. And this whole idea of how you deal with difference and how you work through difference is really important. And it doesn't mean we always agree, but it means that we have to find ways to acknowledge difference and accept difference and find ways to move beyond that and work together. So I just think collaboration and partnership bring a very exciting element to the work. And I think if hopefully the program of events we have for the festival are quite diverse. And I think that thanks to all the partners we have. So which is wonderful, and including Sandrine, who's working with us, hosting 2 events. And Sandrine worked with us last year on silencing Black voices. And I just think these types of partnerships are really important for the work.
Yes, speaking of exciting and brilliant collaborations, especially in the context of Black History Month now, I'm delighted to introduce our special guest, Sandrine Ndahriro, who is involved in the 2021 Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival via 2 events. One is Who Tells the Story? Representational Agency and the Right of Self-Determination in Filmic and Documentary Arts, which is an online event on Sunday, 17th October. That's a panel unpacking the aesthetics of documentary arts in relation to the self-determination of their subjects. And the second event is a panel discussion on the launch of Unapologetic and the importance of centralizing minority voices, and it's to be held on Thursday, 21st October. Sandrine is the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of Unapologetic, a new magazine that seeks to bring together artists, academics, creatives, activists to build a comprehensive view of the social issues in Irish society today. Sandrine made the documentary Unsilencing Black Voices. If you haven't watched it, it's brilliant. It's on YouTube. It was screened by Smashing Times as part of the 2020 Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival. And she was a panelist for last year's festival, speaking in relation to this documentary. Sandrine is completing a PhD in contemporary African literature, post-colonialism, and the environmental humanities at the University of Limerick. Thank you so much for being with us, Sandrine. Unsilencing Black Voices is not just an exceptionally strong documentary, especially in its attention to microaggressions experienced in educational contexts, among many other contexts, but it's also a multifaceted project with a stunning website providing a great set of resources. It would be wonderful to hear about that project first before moving on to the 2 events.
Yeah, so with Unapologetic, with Unsilencing, we created that last year in the wake of BLM, and myself and Catherine Osakoya, who's also another UL student, but she does architecture, so she's just finished. We saw that when it came to discussing racial issues in Ireland, we saw that last year there was a sense of when BLM happened and the tragic death of George Floyd, it was very easy to be like, oh, at least that happens in America, and everyone was felt more calmly in that regard because it was something that happened there. So the black experiences in Ireland were like straight away shut down because we don't experience like in regards to police brutality. So myself and Catherine had seen that on social media, and it was during COVID, so everyone had seen the video, and it was traumatizing, and it was one of those things where it was like, not again. And I think this time it really hit deeper because we were all on social media the whole time, and the fact that I was using Twitter more, so I saw that on Twitter again it was really that us versus them, and I was like, wait, I've been in Ireland for 16 years and I've experienced this. Obviously it's not to the same extent, but I've still experienced it, and like my voice matters there. So that's what we thought of. If we're feeling this frustration, there's definitely other people all across Ireland with that dual identity of being Afro-Irish who have also experienced that. And with that, we really wanted to centralize their voice, and the way of doing that, we were like, let's make a documentary about it. And with that, we asked participants to just think of one incident. So it was really hard because, again, like with racism, it's something that will continuously happen. So to ask someone to think of one example was hard, but the purpose of that was to do different categorization of it. So from primary school to secondary school to college to like working day life and parenthood, in order to show like how racism isn't something that just happens once, it's something that continuously happens. And the way to do that is the way to identify that is by having these conversations. So we thought that we'd really need to give an example of each one. And as you stated, Rita, it was in regards to microaggression, which is one of the most relevant one, but the one which is the hardest to prove. So by doing that and centralizing these voices, we thought that people had more connection to it. If you're listening to a story and you're seeing someone that looks like you, to be like, oh, so I've experienced this too, so how can I really engage in the conversation with that. So that's what and Silencing Black Voices was. And even on the title, we'd seen, as I stated again, like I've been in Ireland for 16 years and I never talked about it before, because it was one of those things, if you're growing up with dual identities, put your head down and just it. So we really wanted to take power back on the narrative, and that's why we had Unsilencing Black Voices, and myself and Catherine promised to like never be silenced on that issue again. And I feel like that's why I've probably been really annoying on Twitter continuously talking about that, because we're really living true with the word that we said. And yeah, so with Unsilencing, like that was the main element, and our core was to keep that conversation going. So it's great that even a year later we're still doing workshops like this and talking about the documentary, because it has that long-lasting effect.
And this year, the conversation around documentary aesthetics goes into further dimensions from what I learned from the festival blurbs about the events. Can you tell us more about the direction of those panel discussions and the new work and the magazine?
Yeah, so like with Who Gets to Tell the Story, it was myself and Dr. Alice Feldman in UCD, and I'd been talking to her about it because for my recent PhD chapter, I'm looking at the representation of the African landscape, but then also the African body through film, and we were looking at it through the sense of who gets to tell the story. So it would be Western versus an African director, and the importance of that, and that sense of taking back the narrative. So I'm always really interested in that, and I'm always interested in centralizing people's own experience, but then also behind the camera screen, it's who is behind that and asking this question. And so that's why we really wanted to look at who gets to tell the story, but really drive home the sense of self-representation, especially when we're living in a really diverse multicultural Ireland. So it's to get people to open up more in regards to what would you like to see on the screen, and something again that departs from stereotypes of different minority voices. So the only way is by having that intimate relationship between the director and the participant or anything like that, because they have to have that commonality and that trust. So by doing that is who gets to tell the story and who's listening to the story, because a lot of narratives within regards to the duality, not everyone wants to listen to it, but in order to create that commonality is by having, as I stated, someone who has that shared experience between often on screen. And so that would be the first talk. And then with the second one, it was with Unapologetic. So it's a magazine that I'd been really thinking about last year, and I got my partner Gareth Gwynn to take part in it, and then my other partner then Margaret Harper, who's also a professor here in UL. And that had come about in regards to how I found myself last year using writing as a form of activism, because it was all online, so I couldn't really go to protest, but I found myself writing more and more personal essays and bringing them with theoretical discourses. And I was like, oh, what would happen if we created this space where we encourage people to write and draw any form of expression when it comes to social issues in Ireland from voices that are brushed aside because they're not, they don't really fit into this paradigm of one of us when it comes to Irishness. So what would happen when you created that space? And we got overwhelming response back, and we, like, for our first issue, we have all of our pieces selected, and we're in the process of getting pictures and collaborating with artists in direct revision, everything like that. So again, it's really uplifting this sense of the power of the voice of the other. So this will be something that will really go into the research that I've done in the importance of minority voices.
Thank you, Sandrine. This leaves us so many rich thoughts around the question of representation, but also across what Mary discussed in her presentation and yours. There are various intersections there which can move us to a discussion of another webinar that is linked in some ways to these questions. And just a reminder that you can send questions and comments in the chat function for Sandrine and Mary. Mary, another webinar on the festival program that focuses on the experiences of racism for women in Ireland, especially the intersection of racism and sexism, and how we can collectively build a society that meaningfully respects diversity. It's a very important intersectional approach there to interculturalism in Ireland. In what ways do you think this event seeks to shed more light on still existing obstacles in the fight against racism and sexism when they intersect in Ireland?
Yes, the event you're referring to is a webinar, and it's hosted by Orla O'Connell, the Director of the National Women's Council of Ireland, and Maria Joyce, the Coordinator from the National Traveller Women's Forum. And they have a very diverse panel. So you have representatives from the National Traveller Women's Forum, from Akidwa, who's a national network of migrant women, and Pavy Point. And I think it's really important that we look at the whole idea of intersectionality and the idea of having that intersectional approach, covering racism, covering sexism, covering, you know, nothing about us without us, and looking at the whole diverse, broader picture of what needs to be addressed in society. And I think, you know, gender is very important, but you can't be a feminist if you're not going to have that intersectional approach. That's my belief anyway, that it's really important that all voices are there. And I loved what Sandrine said when she talked about taking back power of the narrative. That's a, you know, a very interesting phrase. And these are the types of creative conversations we need to have, because yes, a lot has been done, but there is so much more. Sometimes I think you sound like a politician when you say this, but there is so much in society we have not addressed that we need to look at. And particularly at the moment, and I hope that's why the festival, that people will come and enjoy the different programs in the festival. We have online events and we have events on the ground, because for me, there is a rise in society of the far right of intolerance. The narratives that we're hearing about intolerance that are fueling discrimination, you know, hate speech, the whole thing that's happening around fake news and all of that. We really need to be having these conversations and putting them out there to try and build the type of society we all want to live in.
And these are significant points to actually broaden our thinking about interculturalism and the knowledge production that should be done around interculturalism. That's, for example, a magazine like Unapologetic can contribute to in that respect. And but also through what you mentioned earlier, the training program, State of the Art, the nation state as both violator and protector of human rights, those various rights that can be thought of intersectionally. And this program that involves many artists is in many ways linked to the tension and interconnection among the arts, human rights, and interculturalism. I know this is a project that's very close to your heart, Mary, and I'd love to hear about that in the end before we move on to any questions, remaining questions.
Will I say a few words about it now? Will I?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, State of the Art is a very exciting project, I think, because it's supported by the Arts Council. And you know, the Arts Council now have a new equality, human rights and diversity policy. And I think that's very unique and rare. And I think well done to the Arts Council for having that. And what we need to do is take that policy and talk further about what it actually means. So I had mentioned earlier this idea of, you know, whether it's gender or whether it's interculturalism or diversity, the whole idea of representation is important. But we need to go beyond representation. We need to look at what the power structures are and how do you actually share power, because representation might mean sharing power or challenging the structures that are in place. And we felt as artists, you know, over the years, we were looking Smashing Times to the artists are working together, but we felt there was a need to actually build a program where we can say to artists, right, what support do we need if we want to be artists using our work for diversity, for promoting human rights. And what we did was we brought together a diverse range of artists, and we've 14 artists, and they've worked together for the last year. Things like sharing inspiration, so who inspires you, which I think is important to talk about, talking about how they make art, because sometimes that can be interesting. Well, how do you actually, where do you start from? What do you do? Is it an image, an idea? Is it you meet somebody? How do you make the art? And we're hoping to bring out a short book online where we can talk about or show how the different artists talk about how they make art, particularly how they're making art around issues to do with human rights. And even that process for artists, because it can be quite tough sometimes. You're working with dark material, and the idea of connecting artists is really important. So State of the Art, we have a number of events. So there is a visual art exhibition taking place in the Mill Theatre in Dundrum with artists such as Hina Khan and Anna Waliyat. From both artists are now living in Ireland, originally from Pakistan. And we have an event on the rooftop of the Chester Beachy called Rights on the Rooftop. So there's a rooftop garden, and we have an event there again involving the different artists. And we're also building an online gallery to try and make all this work available in many different ways to as many people as possible. And I do have to say, you know, I always like to mention our supporters in terms of the Arts Council and Erasmus Plus and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, because I think we need to encourage support for this type of work for artists who are using their art form from equality, human rights and diversity. It's certainly, for me, something that's very much needed. And I think artists are, certainly the artists we're working with, are very keen to continue the work.
Thank you, Mary. And related to this is a question for you. Rosanna says, I love that you emphasize fulfilling diversity in the arts, that it requires both representation and power sharing. So the question is, what are some of the ways Smashing Times expands power sharing, and how do you hope to see these practices replicated in other organizations?
Okay, interesting question. What we're doing is, it's important that we check our own privilege. So that's really important. And this idea of looking at how we are operating and what we're doing. And that's something we need to all continue to do. The idea of raising awareness, because I was saying earlier around the arts and human rights, sometimes the arts aren't necessarily about giving answers. The arts, you know, one of the artists actually, Hina, who is involved in State of the Art, said recently, my art may not change anything, it may not change the world, but what it can do is encourage us to talk about and generate these small ripples that might reach out and create wider change in society. And I think the whole idea of building links between artists, citizens and communities is important, because art is not some elitist art form that should sit up in its golden tower somewhere. How do we embed arts in communities? But equally, how do communities have access to the arts? And Sandrine referred to this. How do you have power in the arts? How do you know that? How do you know, you're speaking your own voice? People in communities are making their own art. Because I do think we need to question, and I think maybe that's where Smashing Times might play a role. We're saying it's not enough to just talk about representation. Let's talk about the whole idea. What does power sharing actually mean? You know, who are the invisible forces controlling the arts? Sometimes even I as an artist don't fully know the answers to those questions. Is there something, what's got, and it's not a conspiracy theory, it's more the idea of saying, where is the policies coming from? And how do we get artists involved in policy making? And how do we determine the environment we want to live in? Women artists have seen that. You know, the idea that the work we make is not really what the public want to see. That was said by the head of a national theatre. Well, we didn't think that the work we were getting from women writers was really what the public wanted. You know, we've got to start changing these narratives and questioning who is making the decisions on what type of art is being made. So I hope Smashing Times can raise those questions and raise awareness and what I like to call creative conversations. They're really important that they happen.
And to end our creative conversation, a question to you both. I love in the title of Unapologetic, this in the launch, you're saying that you are highlighting the importance of centralizing minority voices and this tension between voicing and minoritization, or the peripheralization of certain voices and certain bodies. So the voicing and the embodiment in the arts against this peripheralization. If we can reflect maybe at the end to hear from Mary and Sandrine, your perspectives on this question of voicing and embodiment in the creative industry and its role in interculturalism. Some final thoughts, maybe about Unapologetic first.
Yeah, no, I think like with the word unapologetic was, again, like from being an English literature student and then being a woman of color doing English literature, a lot of the times it was trying to fit into the narrative where, again, a lot of the times it's taken me years to like be like, oh, there is Black Irish authors like Emma Dabiri that I can read and relate to. So again, with Unapologetic was to create that medium in the now when like this conversation is really at the core front there, because again, like I'm only 26, so I think there's other generations who have already experienced this frustration, but again, maybe didn't have the power to do that. And as I say, like I think I'm so lucky with regards to even the work that Smashing Time has given me the space to do that. So that's why it's like building on with the momentum that I already have. So like even with that, like I'm aware of the privilege that I have, because again, there's been other generations and there's different like other ethnic communities, like even like with the traveling community, where again they're not all given the same space. So but for me with Unapologetic is just continuing that conversation and really showcasing and highlighting the power of the other. So as I stated, like in Ireland it's so diverse and it's so multicultural, and we've had these conversations in regards to how Celtic Tiger changed it, but it's only now in 2021 that we couldn't even find a magazine that we could be like, okay, yes, I can relate to that. So we had to create it in 2021. So it really showcases there's a need for that, for people to feel connected, or people to feel grounded in this sense of belonging. And that's where literature becomes really, really important, because words and expression, they're long lasting. So like even for us, like I know for myself personally, like if it's for one person to read it, if it's a migrant or different ethnic minority, anything like that, for people which feel like their voices are the other and they're brushed aside, to see that and be like, well, I can do that too, because then it'll just become such a normalized thing that there'll be 10 different versions of Unapologetic, which will be dealing with different social issues. So that's where like there'll be the power of the importance of power sharing, where they can see a possibility of one person being able to do it, and then they can see like, oh, we can do it too. And like that's the main ethos of our work with For Unapologetic, is making it as transparent as there is. And if someone else, like we recently had someone who was like, I want to create a magazine like that for migrant voices, and we're like, yes, we'll let you know how everything went. Like it's not greed or anything like that. It's really sharing that power and sharing the knowledge and sharing the resources that you have, and being like, okay, maybe contact someone from Smashing Time like Mary, so you're able to share the resources there. Because in order for like us to have a better comprehension of like the changing nature of Irishness, there has to be multiple artistic creatives that are happening, and through literature like Unapologetic and other things that are going to start happening and have already been happening. That's only going to be done if we're sharing the platform. And as I say, like if I'm in a position of doing that, is highlighting that, but then also providing different resources for other people who may want to start out themselves as well.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. And this idea of power sharing and connection that you both covered, and also its relatedness to what you've engaged with in your creative practice, Mary, and what you've shown us, this connection between body, voice, and imagination across the video, but also your reflection on the role of the poetic imagination in this respect, and how it's interconnected with questions of embodiment, and how that all feeds into thinking of representation and centralization, as you say, Sandrine. Mary, some thoughts about the festival next week? I know you're both tired and excited at this point after all these preparations. If you'd like to end with some thoughts about next week. How is it starting? What is the first event?
Well, we're having an opening ceremony on the 15th of October in the Chester Beatty, and that's open, and tickets are available, they're free. Tickets are available online for the festival. So if you go to smashingtimes.ie, the festival, the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival, which is presented by Smashing Times and Frontline Defenders with our range of partners, 15th to the 24th of October. We have a load of events, online events and on the ground events and outdoor events. So, you know, we have a series of in the open events, plays in Rathfarnham Castle Park. We've got the exhibition I spoke about. We've got the performances and installation in the Chester Beatty, and then all the events online. So hopefully people can check out, and there's a wide range of events, and we just welcome everyone to join us and view the artworks, take part, and then maybe hopefully connect with us, because like Sandrine was saying, this idea of community and connections, really it is about building connections. So we welcome everyone to engage in the festival, and we're looking forward to it and to seeing you all there.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you all for attending and participating in this conversation. I hope you can join us in the next conversation in the series, Interculturalism, Literature and the Arts in Ireland. It will take place on the 11th November from 4:30 to 5:30, and I will be co-hosting it with my colleague and your writer in residence, Oisin Fagan. Have a good evening.